The Alpha King rejected her with his hand still warm from taking her vow ribbon. The cathedral heard the silk tear. Elara Val did not realize it came from her, until she looked down and saw the white ribbon hanging broken from her fingers, one half wrapped around her wrist, the other still trapped beneath Ronan Dareth's black-gloved palm. Moonlight spilled through the towering stained glass and struck the silver threads woven through her wedding gown, turning her into something bright enough to be seen and humiliated properly. At the altar, beneath the carved wolves and crescent stone of the royal crest, Ronan did not look at her when he spoke. "Release the elder daughter." The priest went pale. The nobles in the first pews leaned forward like carrion birds, lifting their heads at the scent of blood. The musicians near the western arch lowered their instruments one by one until the last note died against the vaulted ceiling. Only then did Ronan turn. His face was the sort that turned women reckless and men obedient. Hard mouth, proud brow, eyes like a winter storm over a dark sea. He wore the Alpha crown as if it had grown out of his bones instead of being forged by goldsmiths, and the black ceremonial coat crossing his broad shoulders made him look less like a groom than a king allowing a ritual to happen in his presence. He let the torn ribbon fall from his hand. "I will not take Elara Vale as my queen." The words moved through the cathedral in a stunned ripple, then in a thrill. Elara felt them touch every row before they struck her fully. Her pulse gave one savage beat. The lilies woven through the altar garlands released a sweeter scent, cloying enough to make her stomach turn. Beside her, her mother stopped breathing. Her father recovered first. He stepped forward with a smile stretched too tightly over his teeth. "Your Majesty, perhaps the nerves of the day." "I am not nervous." Ronan's voice never rose. That made it worse. Everything about him stayed controlled, while her world split down the center. "I was given the wrong bride." The cathedral erupted. Whispers tore loose like birds startled from the rafters. A few old pack lords frowned. The younger nobles looked openly delighted. Scandal was better than music, better than prayer, better even than watching a king marry. Scandal was something they could dine on for years. Elara kept her spine straight, because if she allowed it to bend, she might never stand upright again. At the front pew, her younger sister rose as if summoned by a hand she had been waiting for all morning. Seraphine Vale moved beautifully. She always had. Her golden hair lay in polished waves over one shoulder, her pale blue gown soft as poured light, her face arranged in wounded confusion so perfect it would have won pity from saints. She pressed one hand to her chest and lowered her lashes just enough to suggest innocence, then lifted them toward the king with the trembling restraint of a woman pretending she had not imagined this exact moment in private. Elara saw through her because she was the one who had grown up in the same house. She knew which of Seraphine's expressions were real and which had been sharpened through years of use. This one was triumph wrapped in silk. Ronan extended his hand toward Seraphine. "You." Elara heard her own heartbeat in her ears. No one spoke for 3 long seconds. Then the priest swallowed and said weakly, "Your Majesty." "The treaty names Lady Elara." "The treaty will be corrected." Ronan still held out his hand. Seraphine descended the single step from the front pew and laid her fingers in his palm. The court exhaled as one living thing. Elara had thought humiliation would burn hot. Instead, it arrived cold enough to numb. She could feel the marble beneath her slippers, the weight of her veil against her spine, the drag of the jewels in her hair. She could hear every shift of satin in the pews behind her. Somewhere, a woman gave a soft, breathless laugh and quickly covered it with a cough. Ronan turned toward the altar again, Seraphine at his side, and said, "Remove the elder daughter from the dais. Remove, not dismiss, not escort, not send home with dignity. Remove." Elara found her voice in the wreckage. "You might have said it before the cathedral filled." It was a mistake to speak. Every eye came to her, For the first time since shattering her, Ronan looked directly at her. The force of that gaze hit almost physically. He was too powerful a wolf for indifference to be gentle. His attention did not soothe, it pinned, it assessed. It took the measure of whatever stood before him and decided whether it deserved mercy. His expression gave her none. "You should never have been placed here." That sentence hurt more than the rejection, because it carried certainty, because it sounded as if he truly believed her presence beside him was an error that should have been corrected before it offended his sight. Seraphine laid her fingers more tightly into Ronan's hand. "Your Majesty, perhaps Elara may remain until the vows are complete. She is still my sister." Elara nearly laughed at the generosity in that knife. Ronan did not even glance at Seraphine. "No." Then, to the guards, "Open the side doors." The nearest captain moved at once. Elara's father caught her arm. The pressure of his grip told her more than his words. Shame, fury, calculation already turning. He leaned close enough for only her to hear. "Do not make this uglier than it already is." She turned her face toward him slowly. "Uglier?" Lord Vale released her as if her skin had become fire. The priest began rearranging the ceremony around the king's will. Servants rushed to change the altar flowers because Seraphine preferred blue to white. A seamstress darted from the shadows with another ribbon. The kingdom's most sacred wedding rite twisted itself in real time to accommodate the Alpha King's appetite. Elara stood in the middle of it like the discarded outline of a woman. Then the moonstone at her throat turned hot. The pendant had belonged to her grandmother, a smooth pale stone set in old silver, worn only because it was the one thing in House Vale that had ever felt wholly hers. Now it burned through silken skin with such sudden violence that she sucked in a sharp breath and clutched it instinctively. Ronan went still. So did every wolf in the cathedral. Something changed in the air. It thickened, darkened. The incense smoke hanging under the vaulted ceiling shivered as if caught in an invisible wind. Candle flames bent toward Elara, then toward the king. Ronan's head turned back to her. The color drained from Seraphine's face. Elara could smell him suddenly. Pine, iron, winter, male heat wrapped in royal command. The scent slammed through her senses so hard it made the world narrow. His nostrils flared, his jaw locked. The bond hit like a blade driven straight through her ribs. It was not soft. It did not bloom sweetly. It snapped. Pain lanced through her chest and burst into heat so brutal her knees nearly gave. The moonstone flashed white against her throat. The broken ribbon slid from her hand and fell soundlessly to the floor. Ronan made a sound no human should have been able to make. His wolf roared out of him inside the cathedral. The stained glass trembled. Seraphine staggered back. No. An elder in the second row whispered a prayer to the moon. The priest dropped the new ribbon. Elara stared at Ronan as the bond burned through her in violent waves, and she saw the exact instant he understood what sacred law had done to him. He had just rejected his mate, in front of the entire kingdom. His face lost its cold perfection. Shock broke through first, then fury, then something deeper and more dangerous than either. Something male, primal, possessive, and already half out of control. He descended the altar steps, not toward Seraphine, toward Elara. Every step felt like the cathedral moving with him. No one tried to stop him. He stopped so close, she could see the pulse beating hard at the base of his throat. His hand lifted toward the pendant, then halted inches from her skin as if he no longer trusted himself to touch. "Elara," he said. Her name sounded wrecked on his mouth. The guards by the door hesitated. Ronan never looked away from her. "Seal the cathedral." Iron bolts crashed into place. Panic rose in the pews, but his next words cut through it. "No one leaves until I know who put my mate before my altar under another name." Silence slammed down. Seraphine's breath caught audibly. Lord Vale paled. Lady Vale swayed where she stood. Elara heard the last word more clearly than anything else. "My mate." He had publicly discarded her less than a minute earlier. Now the same mouth that had rejected her had turned possessive because the moon had corrected him. The cruelty of it was so complete it almost steadied her. She lifted her chin, though the bond was still tearing through her. You do not get to claim what you just humiliated. For a heartbeat, something like pain crossed Ronan's face. Then his gaze sharpened on her father. And the king said, in a voice that made every soul in the cathedral understand blood was about to spill, if the answer displeased him. Start explaining. Chapter 1. The truth basin was carved from black obsidian and old fear. The priestesses carried it to the center of the altar while the cathedral remained sealed and the kingdom's highest wolves stood trapped with scandal thick as smoke around them. Moonfire candles were set in a circle. Salt water was poured. Silver blades flashed. Somewhere in the back pews, one noble woman had begun to cry softly, either from terror or the disappointment of realizing she might not survive long enough to repeat what she had witnessed. Ronan stood at the edge of the circle like a storm made flesh. He had not looked away from Alara for more than a few seconds since the bond snapped, even when he questioned others. Even when he barked orders at guards and priestesses and council elders, some brutal animal focus in him remained fixed on her, as if his body had redrawn the map of danger and put her at the center of it. Alara hated that the awareness moved both ways. The bond made every breath between them feel intimate, every flick of his fingers, every shift of his shoulders, every darkening in his gaze when someone stepped too near her. The thread of possession running through him made her pulse go hard and uneven beneath her skin, and because she was already wounded, she hated that most of all. The chief priestess sliced her palm and let 3 drops of blood fall into the basin. Blue light spread through the black water like veins under skin. Ronan turned toward Lord Vale. Who knew? Her father stood 3 steps below the altar, his face damp beneath the cathedral lights. He had lost the polished arrogance that made lesser men mistake him for powerful. Stripped of the court, he looked what he was, a clever coward in expensive cloth. You accuse too much too quickly, Your Majesty, he said. There has been a misunderstanding, nothing more. The basin remained dark for the length of one breath. Then blue fire ran over its surface. Lie. The word was never spoken aloud. It didn't need to be. Murmurs broke through the court again. Ronan's expression did not change. That made him seem more dangerous, not less. I'll ask in shorter words. Who knew the treaty bride was my mate? Lord Vale's eyes flicked to Seraphine. It was the smallest movement in the world. It might have meant nothing to anyone else. To Ronan, it meant everything. His voice dropped. Ah, Seraphine's composure cracked. Father, say something. Ronan turned toward her. Alara watched her sister understand, in a slow widening of the eyes, that she no longer had the king's attention in the way she had wanted. He looked at her now as a threat assessment. A witness. A liar who had misstepped in front of a predator, suddenly stripped of ceremony. Seraphine still tried for softness. Your Majesty, I knew nothing. I only obeyed when you chose me. The basin flashed blue again. Lie. Her lips parted. The nobles nearest the front pews took a collective step back from House Vale as if dishonesty might spread by proximity. Alara kept staring at her sister. You knew. Seraphine's gaze snapped to her. Don't be pathetic. You think because a bond snapped that your humiliation vanished? The sentence landed. Alara let it. What surprised her was the sound that came from Ronan. A low, savage growl. Every wolf in the cathedral stiffened. Even the chandeliers seemed to tremble. Ronan descended the remaining steps until he stood directly between Alara and Seraphine, cutting the younger sister out of her line of sight with the breadth of his body. He did not touch Alara. He did not need to. The gesture was more intimate than contact. No one in this room speaks to her like that again. The sheer possessive violence in the sentence stunned the air. Elara's laugh came out sharper than she intended. This is almost insulting twice. Ronan half turned toward her, and there it was again, that flinch of guilt he could not fully hide when she reminded him what he had done. It did not erase anything, make the wound more complicated. His gaze dropped briefly to the moonstone at her throat. Who gave you that pendant? The question felt abrupt enough to be deliberate. My grandmother. What was her name? Maris. The chief priestess made a broken sound and went to one knee. The court went silent. Ronan's eyes sharpened. Speak! The old woman kept her gaze on the floor. Maris Lyran. The name moved through the cathedral like the opening crack in a frozen lake. Elara looked from the kneeling priestess to her mother, who had gone white enough to seem carved from wax. What does that mean? No one answered quickly enough. Ronan did. It means Housevale did not merely hide a bloodline. It buried one the crown once destroyed. The world shifted under her feet. Elara felt it in the sudden ringing in her ears, the cathedral stretching away from her, the strange certainty that every memory from childhood had just been made suspicious. Her grandmother's stories, her mother's fear whenever the pendant showed beneath a collar, the way her father treated her not as beloved or even disliked, but as something to be managed until needed. She looked at Lord Vale. What am I? Her father's silence told more truth than any speech. Seraphine broke first. You are what you were always meant to be. Bargaining piece. The court inhaled sharply. Elara turned toward her sister slowly. Seraphine's lovely face had tightened. All that polished sweetness had curdled under panic and envy. She saw the court staring and no longer cared. Her voice rose with old bitterness, the kind she had hidden so long it came out half as confession, half as poison. Grandmother babbled when she thought no one listened. Father listened. So did I. You were never simply Elara. You were the hidden branch. The blood no one was supposed to know survived. The old line with a claim dangerous enough to trade if the right king could be tied to it. The basin glowed blue so fiercely the water hissed. Truth. Elara's breath left her. Ronan's gaze moved to Lord Vale. You brought my mate to the altar under false pretenses because her blood strengthens the throne. Lord Vale swallowed. The kingdom needs stability. Ronan stepped forward. For the first time, his control cracked visibly. Not in noise, in the way the temperature of the room seemed to drop around him. The candle flames bent inward. His wolf came to the surface in his eyes, bright and lethal, and every guard on the dais straightened as if bracing for impact. You used sacred law as a breeding contract. Lord Vale's knees hit marble. Lady Vale broke then. Please, Your Majesty, he said it was the only way to protect her. Elara turned to her mother. Protect me? Tears spilled down Lady Vale's face. Your grandmother hid you from the Northern Purge. She hid your name. When your father learned what you were, he swore the crown would either value you or destroy us all for keeping you. He said if you reached the throne first, you would live. The truth should not have hurt as much as it did. Elara had expected ambition, not this desperate, ugly version of survival. It did not excuse anything. It only made the rot older. Ronan's jaw tightened. Who else knows? This time no one tried to lie. Lord Vale said, The Regent. The name hit the cathedral like a curse. Ronan's uncle. The man who had negotiated the treaty. The man who had urged the match. The man who had privately suggested Seraphine would make the smoother queen when he last dined at court. Ronan went still in a way that frightened Elara more than the growl had. When? Lord Vale's voice shook. He suspected after Maris died. He found letters. He said the truth could be used if the throne needed old blood. The priestess at the basin whispered, Moon, save us. Ronan did not look at her. My uncle is the one who changed the bride? Lord Vale hesitated. That hesitation ended whatever thin chance he had left. Ronan's power broke across the cathedral. The nearest pew split down the center with a cracking roar. Glass shivered in the windows. Several nobles cried out. Seraphine stumbled back against the altar rail, pale with real fear at last. Elara was meant for the crown, Ronan said, every word sharpened by fury. So why did you place the younger sister in her gown? Lord Vale's voice came out in a rush. Because the regent said the old line was useful only if controlled. Because he said the bond might never snap if the king was guided correctly. Because he promised Seraphine would hold the throne more gracefully, and Elara could still be... He faltered. Ronan's stare sliced through him. Still be what? Lord Vale closed his eyes. Available. The silence afterward was monstrous. Elara understood before anyone said it aloud. She had been brought to the altar because her blood mattered. Her sister had been placed beside the king because someone thought Elara could be kept behind the throne, bartered later, bred if necessary, erased if inconvenient. The humiliation was almost secondary now. The violation went deeper. They had not merely rejected her, they had rearranged her life as if she were livestock in silk. Ronan's face became unreadable. Then he turned to Thorn, his guard captain. "A rest house Vale," gasps rippled. Seraphine recoiled. "You can't." "I can," Ronan said, "and if your father speaks again without permission, remove his tongue before he wastes more sacred air." The guards moved. Steel rang. Lady Vale sobbed openly. Lord Vale offered no resistance because men like him were brave only when protected by titles. Seraphine did resist. She jerked away from the first guard, eyes wild, and lunged not for the door, but for Elara. "You ruin everything by breathing," she hissed. The movement happened too fast for thought. Ronan caught Seraphine by the throat before she reached her sister. He did not lift her from the floor. He did not need spectacle. He only held her in place with one gloved hand and looked into her face with the coldest expression Elara had ever seen on a living man. "She breathes because the moon wills it," he said softly. "Choose your next words with the same care." Seraphine's lips trembled. Tears finally spilled. Not pretty now, not arranged, but hot with rage. "You would have chosen me," she whispered. "If the bond had stayed silent, you would have chosen me." Ronan did not deny it. The honesty of that should have relieved Elara. Instead, it drove the knife deeper. Seraphine saw the pain land and smiled despite her terror. That was when Elara understood her sister would always choose the wound if given a blade. Ronan released Seraphine to the guards as if her skin offended him. "Take them all." The family was dragged from the altar circle under every gaze in the cathedral. Only Elara remained. Only Elara and the king, who had ruined her, claimed her, and now stood a few feet away breathing as if the bond itself was an injury under his ribs. The priestess at the basin cleared her throat carefully. "Your Majesty, the sacred law requires immediate sealing of the bond once it is revealed in ritual space." Elara snapped her gaze toward the old woman. "Absolutely not." Ronan's head turned toward her. The priestess swallowed. "The bond can become unstable if left unacknowledged." Elara felt his attention hit her again, heavy and hot and impossible to ignore. The awareness of him had become merciless. The very air around her seemed tuned to his presence now. He did not touch her, he did not speak. Somehow that made it more dangerous. Then he said, "To the priestess and the whole listening court, she will not be forced into anything in my cathedral." The words should have pleased her. Instead, they settled over the raw wound of the rejection and felt almost unbearable, because the same man who had denied her publicly was now sounding protective in front of the same witnesses. Elara looked him dead in the face. "Your cathedral?" The faintest flicker crossed his expression. Shame, there and gone. Then a palace runner burst through the side sacristy door so hard he nearly slid on the marble. He hit one knee. "Your Majesty, the regent is gone." Every head turned. The runner sucked in air and added, He fled the palace a quarter-hour ago. The Eastern archives were opened before dawn. 3 genealogy ledgers are missing. Ronan's gaze cut back to Alara with terrifying focus. The moonstone at her throat flared, and deep under the cathedral something answered. Chapter 2. Ronan did not ask whether she felt it, he saw it. The silver fire racing beneath the moonstone lit enough of her skin that the nearest priestess actually crossed herself. Alara gripped the altar rail to steady the sudden wave of heat rolling through her chest, but it wasn't pain this time. It was direction. A pull. Something below the cathedral calling to the blood she had never known how to name. Ronan was beside her before she finished swallowing her breath. He still did not touch. His hand hovered near her elbow, near her waist, near enough to catch if she fell, and far enough to prove he was fighting something with teeth. "What do you feel?" Alara hated how aware she was of the heat coming off him. "Something under us." His eyes narrowed. "The sealed well." The chief priestess looked up sharply. "It cannot answer. It was bound after the purge." Ronan's gaze never left Alara's face. Apparently not well enough. The runner kept kneeling, forgotten by everyone except the guards. The cathedral had become too small for what was happening, too public, too holy, too compromised. Ronan made the decision like kings made most things, quickly and without apology. Clear the court. Lock down the palace. No one in or out. He turned to Thorn. "Bring 6 men and the chief priestess. The rest keep the Vale family separated and under guard." Seraphine, halfway to the doors in chains, twisted toward him. "You cannot leave me like this." Ronan looked at her once. "Watch me." Alara almost hated how satisfying that was. Almost. The court emptied in a frenzy of whispers and fear. Nobles stumbled over themselves to get out. Elders argued sacred precedent while backing away. The musicians vanished first, which Alara thought unreasonably wise. In less than 5 minutes, the cathedral of spectacle became something darker, a stone chamber echoing with the retreat of witnesses and the approach of buried history. When the last guest was gone, Ronan finally looked at Alara fully. The silence between them sharpened. "You're coming with me," he said. The command in his voice struck sparks off her temper. "After what you did at the altar, you don't get to start issuing orders as if the moon erased your manner." A dangerous warmth lit in his eyes. The Bond reacted instantly, as if pleased she still had enough spirit to cut him. "It didn't erase anything," he said. "It made the stakes worse. That must be so hard for you." He took that without flinching. "Hard is not the word I'd use." His gaze moved over her face, her throat, the pendant, and something roughened almost imperceptibly in the way he breathed. Alara felt that too. The Bond made his restraint visible. It made her body notice every place he was holding himself back from reaching. It was a vicious kind of intimacy. The chief priestess led them through the rear sacristy and down a stair cut into the old foundation stone. The cathedral above had been all light and height and public pageantry. This passage was the opposite. Narrow, cold, damp with centuries. Moonfire lamps cast silver blue along the walls, illuminating old carvings Alara had never seen before. Wolf kings bowing before women holding moonstones. Rivers of silver winding around 2 crowns, not 1. She slowed at the first carving. Ronan noticed. The priestess noticed that he noticed. No one said anything, which somehow said more. The stair spiraled deep beneath the cathedral until it opened into a circular chamber carved around a black underground pool, the sealed well. Silver runes banded the stone lip. Iron chains had been sunk into the rock at equal points, though half were rusted now, and one had split entirely. Moonlight should not have reached this place. Yet the water glowed from within with a dim, eerie sheen like a blade hidden under ice. Alara stopped at the edge and knew, with the shocking certainty of blood recognizing blood, that it had been waiting. The moonstone burned brighter. The well answered. Silver light rose in slow spirals from the surface, and with it came memory not her own, cold hands pressing her grandmother down in mud, flames devouring a northern manor, a woman's scream cut off under water. The images hit Elara hard enough to make her stagger. Ronan caught her. His hand landed at her waist. The world vanished. Heat slammed through the bond so violently her breath broke. He felt it too. She knew because his fingers tightened once involuntarily, and a sound low in his chest almost escaped him before he mastered it. For one terrible, suspended second, the underground chamber narrowed to that contact. The hard span of his hand, the steel in his body, the way the bond reached like something starving finding skin after endless hunger. Then he released her, too fast, too carefully. "What did you see?" he asked. Elara hated that her voice came out thin. "Fire, my grandmother, a woman drowning." The chief priestess went white, the old purges. Ronan crouched by the well, one knee on the black stone, and touched the rune nearest the broken chain. These seals were broken from the inside. Thorn swore under his breath. By who? Before anyone could answer, footsteps sounded from the far passage. All 6 guards turned. The first body that stumbled into the chamber wore palace livery and a knife in its back. He fell face first onto the stone. Behind him came a second servant, bleeding from the mouth, and behind her, Lady Vale. Elara's mother was shoved into the light by 2 masked wolves in black leathers. Her hair had come loose, blood streaked one sleeve. Terror made her barely recognizable. And behind her, entering the well chamber with the confidence of a man who had been using hidden doors for years, came the regent. He resembled Ronan enough to be family, and differed enough to be monstrous. The same dark coloring, the same predatory poise. Yet where Ronan's power felt like winter, the regent's felt like polished rot. Elegant, smiling, and entirely willing to step on throats without wrinkling his cuffs. "Well," the regent said mildly, taking in the chamber. "That escalated faster than I'd hoped." Ronan rose. The temperature in the room seemed to drop by 10 degrees. "You ran." The regent's smile did not dim. I adjusted. "There's a difference." Lady Vale tried to speak. One of the masked wolves pressed a blade to her back. Elara felt the bond in Ronan turn into something grim and lethal. "Release her." The regent looked at Elara instead. "There she is, the hidden branch." Maris always was irritatingly competent. The sentence froze what little air remained in the chamber. Elara stared. "You knew my grandmother? Oh, child, I hunted your grandmother." Ronan stepped forward. Thorn moved with him, but the regent lifted one hand lazily. 4 more masked wolves emerged from the side shadows with drawn blades. They must have entered through the archive tunnels while the guards sealed the cathedral. The regent said, "If we all start acting on instinct, your mate loses her mother first." Elara's stomach dropped. Ronan went still again, that terrifying stillness before violence commits. "Why are you here?" he asked. The regent's gaze slid toward the well. Because the altar failed. Because your father wasted too many years burning one line and propping up another. Because the moon has poor timing and worse taste. He finally looked at Ronan. And because if the old blood survives and the final well wakes properly, the throne stops belonging only to you, the chief priestess whispered. "The moon crown." The regent smiled. "At last someone in this room remembers history." Elara felt the truth land before anyone explained it. The carvings, the women with moonstones, the 2 crowns joined in one oath. Ronan's voice went flat. "You changed the bride because you meant to keep the Lyran line near the throne without letting it stand beside it." "Of course." The regent's gaze warmed with something more chilling than cold. "Seraphine is decorative, obedient when praised, and vain enough to worship power if she's allowed to wear jewels next to it. Elara was always the problem." Lady Vale made a broken sound. "Please, I expected the bond to remain dormant until it could be managed. Once it snapped in public, the calculation changed. I won't have an awakened moon heir walking my court. Ronan's jaw hardened. Your court? The regent's mouth curved. Perhaps not yet, though your father said much the same before he died, and look how that ended. The sentence struck like a hidden blade. Ronan's eyes went silver. You killed my father? No, the regent's smile widened. I merely let him become the man he wanted to be and made sure the truth buried him afterward. Your mother, however, was more work. Every living thing in the well chamber froze. Elara felt Ronan's rage slam through the bond so hard her own pulse staggered under it. The violence in him became almost unbearable, vast and cold and murderous enough to make the well light shiver. The regent went on, unhurried, because men like him loved the sound of their own damage. She objected. To the purge, to the marriage alliance, to what should be done if the hidden branch ever surfaced. She became inconvenient. Ronan took one step. The masked wolves tightened around Lady Vale. Careful, the regent said softly. You've already rejected one bride today. It would be tragic to kill the wrong mother before you get the replacement story straight. Elara moved before she decided to. Enough! Her voice rang harder than expected in the chamber. The moonstone flashed. The well answered with a low hum under the stone. Every gaze shifted to her. The regent's expression sharpened with real interest for the first time. There you are. Elara stepped toward the well, not away from it. Fear was there. So was rage. Under both lay something older waking in her blood. Some instinct that hated his voice in the same ancient place the carvings had touched. You built this morning to control me, she said. You used my sister to replace me, my father to hide me, and my mother to keep me quiet. You are very brave with women tied to altars. Ronan's head turned slightly toward her, not enough to lose sight of the threat, enough to show he had heard every word. The regent's smile thinned. And you are very bold for a girl who still believes she has choices. Elara felt the broken ribbon still tied around her wrist, the silk damp now with sweat and cathedral dust. She looked down at it, white gone grey, promise torn in half. Something in her settled. Then she untied it and dropped it into the well. The water flared silver. The shockwave hit the chamber so hard every lamp went out. Chapter 3. Darkness swallowed them for half a heartbeat. Then the well exploded into light. Silver fire ran up the broken chains and across the old runes, waking symbols etched so deep into the stone they seemed to rise from the bedrock itself. The masked wolves nearest the lip stumbled back, cursing. One lost his grip on Lady Vale. Thorn lunged and dragged her clear. The chief priestess dropped to her knees in prayer. The well began to sing, a low, strange vibration, like 100 glass bells ringing beneath water. Elara stood at its edge, with the moonstone blazing against her throat. The ribbon she had dropped no longer floated. It dissolved. The regent's expression changed for the first time from amused control to furious disbelief. You stupid girl! Do you know what you've touched? No, Elara said, and looked straight at him. Do you? Ronan's attention flicked from the well to her face to the regent and back again, rapidly recalculating the battlefield. The bond between them had become unbearable in the silver light. It was no longer only heat and awareness. It was recognition layered with something more dangerous, the sense that they had become each other's leverage in a room full of enemies. The regent signaled the masked wolves. Steel flashed. The chamber broke into violence. Thorn met the first attacker with a shoulder check that sent both of them into the wall. One of Ronan's guards took a blade under the ribs and tore the attacker's throat out with his shifting jaw before he finished falling. Lady Vale crawled toward the priestess' circle, sobbing. The regent himself moved not toward Ronan, but toward Elara. Ronan saw it and went feral. He crossed the chamber fast enough to blur. The first man in his path never even managed a strike. Ronan's sword entered under the chin and came out in a spray of dark blood. He ripped it free and turned the motion into the next kill, driving his shoulder into a second attacker hard enough to crack bone. The air thickened with wolf scent, hot iron, and the wet copper tang of opened flesh. The regent reached Alara at the well lip. He grabbed for the moonstone. Alara flinched back, but his fingers brushed the pendant and screamed. The old silver burned him. He jerked away with a curse, staring at his palm where a white blister mark had already risen. "Leer and blood only," the chief priestess whispered in wonder. The regent heard it, so did Ronan. Their eyes met across the chaos. The regent shifted tactics instantly. "Take her alive!" 3 masked wolves turned toward Alara. The first one reached her and got a silver bowl to the temple for his trouble. She had not even seen herself snatch it off the well altar. The metal connected with a satisfying crack. The man dropped. The second caught her wrist before she could swing again. His grip crushed. Alara twisted, drove her knee up and felt cartilage give under the strike. He snarled and dragged her sideways anyway. Then Ronan was there. He did not use the sword this time. He took the man apart with his hands. It was too fast to follow and too brutal to mistake. 1 second the wolf had Alara's wrist. The next he was on the ground choking on blood while Ronan stood over him, breathing hard enough to shake with the effort of staying in human skin. Alara stared. His gaze dropped to her wrist where the attacker's fingers had already left a red mark. Something savage moved across Ronan's face. It was not theatrical. It was not calculated. It was the purest expression she had seen on him all day. "He touched you." The words came out low and ruined. Alara opened her mouth to say what she didn't know. The regent solved the problem by throwing a silver knife straight at Ronan's throat. Alara saw the flash. Down. Ronan turned with impossible speed. The blade missed his neck by inches and struck the wellstone, where it hissed as if the silver runes themselves rejected it. The regent smiled thinly. "Still quick. Your mother would be pleased." That did it. Ronan's restraint vanished. He advanced. The regent backed once, then twice, the first real sign that beneath all his polish he understood exactly what he had provoked. "You think the bond makes her yours?" he said, voice rising. "It makes her dangerous. If the moon crown wakes beside the Alpha throne, the packs divide, the old claims return. Every noble who bent to your father bends elsewhere." Ronan kept coming. "Then I'll teach them where to bend." The force in that answer rolled through the chamber. The bond flared so violently Alara nearly lost breath again. The regent saw it. Of course he did. Men like him noticed every weakness immediately. His smile sharpened. "There it is." He looked at Alara, not Ronan. "Do you feel that?" His need already stripping his judgment. "This is why kings should never be mated to power they cannot dominate." The sentence was meant to provoke. It worked in 3 directions at once. Ronan went colder. Alara went angrier. The well went brighter. The water rose, only an inch, then 2. It climbed the black stone lip without spilling, suspended by something other than gravity. The whole chamber stilled around it. Even the struggling guards faltered as the light spread over the ceiling like a second hidden sky. The chief priestess pressed both hands to the floor. "It's choosing." The regent looked toward the well too late. Silver water lashed out. It did not strike Ronan. It did not strike Alara. It wrapped around the regent's sword arm and dragged him to one knee. For the first time his composure shattered. "What have you done?" Alara stood at the well lip, wrist throbbing, breath unsteady, moonstone burning like a second heart. "Apparently," she said, and the well's strange light made her voice sound older than it was, "I stopped being the thing you could move around the board." Ronan looked at her then. Not at the moon air, not at the hidden branch, not even at the mate whose rejection had become his shame. At her. It was a hard, arresting look, fierce enough to make her blood leap despite everything. Recognition was in it now, and something darker beginning beneath it. a kind of obsession not yet admitted, only born. The chief priestess spoke into the charged silence. The well answers her. The moon crown lives. The regent snarled and reached for a second blade with his left hand. Ronan crossed the remaining distance and drove his fist into his uncle's mouth, hard enough to send blood across the stones. The chamber held its breath. The Alpha King hauled the regent up by the front of his coat and said, with terrible calm, "You plan to put my mate behind my throne." The regent laughed through blood. "I plan to keep you king." Ronan's mouth curved without humor. "You keep mistaking those as the same thing." He threw his uncle to the floor. Thorn kicked the hidden blade away. Two guards dragged the regent up, one on each side. For the first time, the older man looked something close to afraid, not because he had lost the room, but because he had just understood how completely he had lost Ronan. The danger in that realization moved through Elara too. This was the same man who had publicly humiliated her. Now he looked ready to burn the kingdom for what had been done to her in private. The whiplash should have made her trust neither version. Instead, it made him harder to survive. The chief priestess rose slowly. "Your Majesty, if the moon crown has answered, the old law must be spoken before witnesses." The regent barked a laugh. "Go ahead. Tell him." No one wanted to, so Elara did. "Tell me." The priestess looked from the well to the pendant, to the king, and swallowed. Before the purge, the realm was not ruled by one crown. The Alpha King held war and law. The Moon Queen held blood, oath, and succession. The kingdoms united through marriage, but neither rule erased the other. If a living Lyran heir awakened a sealed well and the Alpha throne accepted the bond, the Moon Crown would rise again. Elara heard the sentence clearly. Accepted the bond. Not merely felt it, accepted it. The whole chamber seemed to turn toward Ronan. The regent smiled bloodily. There, at last, the pretty part. Elara's heart gave one hard thud. Because for all his fierce protection, all his rage, all the brutal instinct in him now, Ronan had still rejected her first. Publicly, coldly. That could not be unwritten. It would shape whatever came next, no matter how violently his wolf reached for her now. The chief priestess finished, almost in a whisper. If the Alpha King accepts her before moon law, she does not become only his mate. Ronan's gaze locked on Elara. She becomes his equal. The silence after that felt endless. Then the regent began to laugh. Chapter 4. The laugh died when Ronan drew his sword and set the point beneath his uncle's chin. "Do it again," the king said softly. The regent stopped. Silver water still coiled around the lip of the well, bright enough to turn the chamber into a place made of knife light and old ghosts. Elara could feel every living person in it, the priestess on her knees, her mother shuddering against the wall, the guards bleeding and breathing, the two men at the center of all this ruin, one born to inherit a crown, the other willing to poison bloodlines to steal it, and beneath all of it, the bond between her and Ronan, merciless and awake. The regent tilted his face up carefully from the sword point. "You can't accept her publicly now." Ronan did not blink. "Watch me." The older man's smile returned, thinner and uglier. "You rejected her before witnesses. If you reverse yourself now, you weaken the throne." Elara expected Ronan to deny that. He didn't. Instead, he said, "The throne was weakened when my father let you near it." The regent's gaze cut to Elara. "Hear him. Such devotion already. You should be flattered. Most women only have to endure one public humiliation before their king becomes obsessed." Ronan moved so fast the sword point sliced the regent's jaw before the guards caught him. Blood ran. Elara felt the violence in Ronan like a second pulse under her own skin. It was becoming too easy to sense the exact shape of his rage, too easy to tell when he was holding, when he was near breaking, when her pain worsened it. The closeness of that frightened her more than the obvious danger in the room. The chief priestess rose shakily. "Your Majesty, the law need not be spoken now. The rite may be delayed until dawn tomorrow." "No," said the regent. "No," said Ronan. They spoke at the same time. The chamber went still again. The regent smiled with blood on his teeth. "Delay gives me time, delay gives her time. Delay gives every noble in the kingdom time to decide whether the hidden moon heir should live long enough to stand beside you. Half the court will crown her. The other half will put a blade between her ribs before sunset." Elara looked at him. "And you think saying that makes me want your protection? I think it makes you understand how alone you would be without mine." It was such a monstrous thing to say that it almost passed for strategy. Ronan answered for her. "She has mine." The words landed hard. The bond shuddered through both of them. Elara felt the heat surge under her skin and hated how much that simple, brutal promise affected her. Perhaps because it came from the same man who had denied her first. Perhaps because it sounded like the truth anyway. The regent saw it, and his eyes glittered. "There. Good. That look in both of you. Now we finally have something worth ruining." Ronan handed his sword to Thorn without taking his gaze off his uncle. "Lock him below the east tower. Chain him in silver. If he speaks to anyone but me, break his jaw and make him try harder." The guards dragged the regent away. He did not struggle. He only looked at Elara over his shoulder and said, "Ask your mother what price she paid to keep you breathing." Lady Vale sobbed louder. When the chamber finally emptied of soldiers and the dead were removed, only Ronan, Elara, Lady Vale, Thorn, and the priestess remained beside the well. The silence after bloodshed always had a strange quality. It seemed more solid than ordinary silence, as if violence pressed itself into the walls and waited to be remembered later. Elara turned toward her mother. Lady Vale had shrunk somehow in the last hour. She still wore the elegant gown chosen for the royal wedding, but blood marked one sleeve and one hem had torn. Her face looked years older than it had that morning. That should have softened Elara. It did not. Hurt rarely loosened on command. "The price," Elara said. "Now." Lady Vale covered her mouth with shaking fingers. "Your grandmother stole you from the north on the night the manor burned. She brought you to us because I was her daughter and because I had just lost a child in birth." She swallowed painfully. "A son." Elara stared. Lady Vale kept speaking because once truth finally breaks loose, it tends to arrive like floodwater. "Your father said the dead infant could become a shield. He said if anyone counted heirs, they would find one daughter in our arms, one elder child on our records, and no reason to search farther. Maris cut your hair, changed your cradle cloth, and placed that stone around your neck. She made me swear I would never speak your true name." The well light rippled. Elara heard only one part. "My true name?" Lady Vale's tears spilled. "Elaris." The name struck somewhere deeper than memory. It fit with horrible ease. Ronan's gaze shifted to the pendant, as if the sound of the name unlocked something old in him too. The chief priestess whispered it under her breath and bowed her head. "Elaris Lyran. Not Elara Val. A hidden daughter wrapped in another family's grief and passed off as their own. Something inside Elara went still. All day she had been reacting, to humiliation, to the bond, to betrayal, to revelations thrown like stones. Now a colder clarity settled over her. She looked at the woman who had raised her and saw the love, yes, but also the failure, the silence, the years of half-protection that let others use her life as a bargaining table. "Did you ever mean to tell me?" Lady Vale flinched. "I wanted to, but you didn't. Your father would have handed you over if he suspected I knew too much. And you stayed." The sentence cut because it was true. Lady Vale went white. "I stayed because if I ran, he would find us. I stayed because sometimes survival is uglier than bravery. I stayed." Because I thought one day you would be queen and safe." Ronan's mouth hardened. Alara looked at him and saw the same thing in his face she felt in her own chest. No patience left for survival used as excuse by people who had let cowards rule the room. She turned away from her mother first, not because forgiveness was impossible, because it was unavailable tonight. The chief priestess cleared her throat softly. "Your Majesties," Alara cut her a look sharp enough to stop the title halfway into the air. The old woman amended wisely. "My lady, the well is still awake. It will not remain open forever without choosing its sovereign." Ronan spoke before Alara could answer. "Then it waits." The priestess hesitated. "The old law. I know the old law." She bowed and retreated. Thorn followed Lady Vale out after receiving a quiet order from the king. That left only Ronan and Alara in the silver-lit chamber under the cathedral. Standing on opposite sides of the well that had just given her back a name and placed a crown-shaped shadow between them. For the first time since the altar, there was no audience. That somehow made him more dangerous. Ronan took one step closer, then stopped. The restraint in that single movement did more to her heartbeat than a dozen actual touches might have. "Alara," he said. "Alaris," she replied. His eyes darkened. He repeated it once, low and rough and entirely too aware. "Alaris." The way he said her true name went through her like a hand. She hated that. She hated him for having that kind of mouth after what he'd done. "You don't get to sound pleased," she said. "You rejected me in front of the kingdom before I was useful enough to glow." The sentence landed exactly where she aimed it. Ronan took it without defense. "I know." "Do you?" Her voice sharpened. "Do you know what it felt like to stand there while you reached for my sister as if I were a clerical mistake?" His jaw tightened. "Yes. No, you don't. I know because I watched your face when I did it." The answer came quiet and merciless. "I know because I replayed it every second after the bond snapped. I know because if I could cut that moment out of the day with a blade, I would—" Alara went still. The honesty was a problem. Monsters were easier to hate when they lied beautifully. Ronan kept choosing truth even when it damaged him, and some wounded part of her found that harder to survive than excuses. He looked at the well between them. "I believed altered papers. I believed my uncle. I believed your family wanted the younger sister on the throne. I thought I was correcting politics." She laughed once, without joy. "You corrected me right out of my own wedding." His gaze came back to her. Yes, that single word struck like a bruise. The bond between them tightened. Not with sweetness, but with that same terrible recognition. Two people forced into honesty because everything gentler had burned away. Ronan moved around the well, slow, visible, giving her every chance to step back. She did not. When he stopped in front of her, close enough that his heat pressed into the silver chill, he kept his hands at his sides. "I will not ask forgiveness tonight," he said. Smart. "I will ask something else." Her pulse kicked. "What? Do not face this alone out of spite." The sentence was unexpected enough to leave her momentarily wordless. His gaze sharpened on her face. "My uncle will not stop. The court will smell weakness by dawn. Half the Pax will think you're a threat. The other half will think you're a symbol. Symbols get killed quickly if they don't stand beside something people fear more." "Is that your best courtship?" A rough, almost smile touched his mouth and vanished. "No, my best is worse." The answer hit at the wrong time and the wrong depth. Alara held his gaze through it. "And if I say no to standing beside you, then I still kill for you. I just have to work harder to convince you I'm worth the mess afterward." The well behind them hummed. The bond surged. For one reckless second, the need in him turned visible, contained, leashed, but enormous. It lived in the way he looked at her mouth, then forced his eyes away, the way his fingers flexed once at his sides and stayed empty, the way his body angled toward hers as if every instinct he possessed had already made a decision the man inside it was still trying to deserve. Elara swallowed. "Why are you making this harder?" His answer came low. "Because the moon already made it impossible." Then the cathedral bells above them began to ring, not for prayer, for alarm. Chapter 5. The bells were followed by screams. Thorn burst back into the well chamber with blood across one cheek. North Gate breached, the regent's men inside the palace. They came dressed in royal livery. Ronan was moving before the sentence ended. The king changed in an instant from dangerous restraint to battle command. "Get her out through the archive tunnels." Elara stared at him. Absolutely not. He had the nerve to look briefly furious with her. "This is not a discussion." "Then you should stop making it sound like one." Another scream echoed faintly down the stair. Ronan's eyes flashed silver. "My soldiers know those corridors. Assassins in palace colors do too. If they reach this chamber and realize the well woke for you, every blade turns in one direction." Elara stepped into that instead of away from it. "And if I vanish underground while you bleed in the cathedral, how exactly does that strengthen the moon crown?" His stare held hers. Even with alarm bells shuddering through stone, the bond made the moment feel viciously intimate. Thorn cleared his throat with a soldier's desperation. "Majesty, while the two of you discover whether stubbornness is hereditary, more men are dying upstairs." Ronan never broke eye contact with her. "Stay 3 steps behind me." Elara lifted her chin. 2, 3, 2. A dangerous glint touched his face despite everything. "You bargain under fire. I was raised by veils. I bargain under humiliation too." That hit. Then they were running. The stair back to the cathedral smelled of smoke before they reached the top. Moonfire lamps flickered in the draught from open doors. The first body lay half across the landing in royal blue, throat cut. Another groaned by the sacristy arch. The great nave beyond had become a war zone of shattered pews, screaming nobles who had hidden instead of leaving, and wolves in palace colors turning blades on their own. The regent had not only fled, he had prepared. Ronan drew his sword, and the entire cathedral seemed to rearrange around him. The Alpha King stepping into battle was not a subtle sight. Men saw him and hesitated. Wolves scented him and either rallied or froze. Power rolled off him so thick the air near his body seemed sharpened. "Thorn, left transept. Lock it down. No one touches her." He looked at Elara once. Hard. "Stay close." This time she did not argue. The fighting hit in waves. A disguised guard lunged from behind a pillar, and Elara saw him before Ronan did. Right. Ronan pivoted and killed the man mid-stride. That happened 3 more times in the next minute. Elara had a vicious clarity under pressure, the kind born not from training but from surviving rooms where everyone had reasons to smile while they cut. She spotted movement in reflections, in shadows, in the shift of shoulders before attack. Ronan adapted instantly, fighting as if her warnings had become part of his own senses. It should not have worked that well. It did. A noblewoman shrieked as one of the false guards grabbed her by the hair and dragged her toward the altar, perhaps for leverage, perhaps because fear made men stupid. Elara snatched up a fallen brass candlestick and hurled it with both hands. It struck the attacker's temple. The woman broke free. Ronan looked at Elara in that split second with something fierce and almost disbelieving. Then he turned and drove his blade into another throat. The cathedral doors burst inward again. More black-clad wolves poured through. Not royal guard this time, but northern pack fighters wearing the old black wolf of Frostfang on their shoulders. A declaration. The regent had chosen his side openly. The court understood it too. Panic went animal. Nobles scrambled over benches. Priestesses screamed prayers. A child cried somewhere near the side chapel. Blood spread in bright slicks over the marble floor where Alara had been rejected less than an hour ago. The whole day had become an insult to God. Ronan took one look at the numbers and changed tactics. To the west crypt, Thorn signalled. Surviving royal guards closed ranks around them. They began pushing through the side aisle toward the old burial passage. The northern wolves recognized Alara instantly, their focus sharpened with ugly purpose. There, take the girl, alive if possible. The words chilled more than the blades. One attacker broke through the guard line and came straight for her. Alara dodged the first strike. The second nicked her sleeve. Before he could recover, Ronan caught the man by the face and drove him headfirst into a pillar so hard the stone cracked. Blood misted the air. Ronan turned back to Alara, breathing hard. "Are you hit?" "No." "Good." The relief in that one syllable struck too deep. They reached the west crypt passage just as another wave crashed through the nave. The narrow stone corridor worked in their favor. Only 2 men could come abreast. Thorn and 3 guards held the entrance while Ronan shoved the burial slab closed behind them. The passage plunged into darkness, lit only by small ancestral lamps. Alara pressed one hand to the wall, catching breath. Somewhere behind the slab, steel still rang. Ronan turned to her. The bond was brutal in close quarters. His scent filled the corridor. Blood, winter, the raw, male heat of a body just used hard in violence. Her pulse had not slowed from the fight. Now it had nowhere to go except louder. He looked at the sliced sleeve where the blade had kissed fabric. "Show me." "It didn't cut skin. Show me." The command came out harsher than he intended. He knew it because his expression shifted immediately, anger turning inward. "Please." The correction hit almost worse than the order. Alara peeled back the torn satin. The blade had grazed her arm shallowly after all. A thin line of red marked the inside of her forearm. Ronan stared at it too long. Then, very carefully, he reached for her. He paused first. Permission. That small act of restraint undid something in her harder than force would have. Alara nodded once. His fingers closed around her wrist. The bond detonated. Heat ripped up her arm and straight into her chest. Ronan hissed a breath between his teeth, as if he felt the same wildfire, which of course he did. His hand was warm, calloused, much too steady. The contrast between that steadiness and the savagery he had shown 2 minutes earlier made the contact unbearable. "It's shallow," he said, voice rough. Alara should have pulled away. She didn't. He looked up. The corridor shrank around them. Stone, shadows, ancestral lamps. That was all. No court, no altar, no witnesses. Only a king with blood on his knuckles holding the wrist of the woman he had ruined, both of them caught in the violent honesty of a bond neither had chosen correctly the first time. His thumb moved once over the inside of her wrist. That tiny movement did more damage than the battle. "Alara," he said. "Alaris." His gaze darkened again. "I know." "Then use it." Something changed in his face at that. Hunger, recognition, a dangerous kind of reverence. "Elaris," he said, softer now. The way her true name sounded in his mouth made the corridor tilt. Thorn pounded on the slab from the other side. "Majesty, decide whether you're seducing or escaping. I need the next order." The moment shattered. Ronan released her immediately, jaw hard with the effort of dragging himself back into command. "Archive tunnel to the east tower. We move now." Alara almost laughed from the sheer violence of being snatched out of that edge. Instead, she followed him into the dark passage running beneath the royal dead. It took them 10 minutes to realize the tunnel had been compromised. They found the first body slumped against a niche wall, throat opened, a royal courier by his insignia. The second had been stripped of his keys. The third still clutched a message cylinder in one hand. Ronan pried it loose and broke the seal. His eyes went colder with every line he read. "What?" He handed her the note. "If the hidden queen reaches dawn, kill the sister first. The elder bleeds for blood, the younger bleeds for grief. Use whichever opens her." Elara read it twice before the meaning fully turned in her stomach. Seraphine, the regent wanted her alive. For bait, for grief, for leverage. The hatred that rose in Elara surprised her with its shape. Not because Seraphine deserved protection after what she had done, because the regent had reached into one more family wound and decided it could be weaponized. He was so certain women only existed as tools around power that he could not imagine any consequence for touching the wrong one. Ronan watched her face. "We get to the East Tower first." The tunnel ahead opened into a low chamber lined with old records and broken shelves, the archive vault. And at its center, standing beside an overturned chair with her hands chained in front of her and fury burning through every pretty line of her face, was Seraphine. She laughed when she saw them. "I was wondering which one of you would arrive first." Chapter 6. Seraphine looked beautiful in ruin. Her blue gown was torn at one shoulder. Her gold hair had come half loose from its jeweled combs. Blood marked the corner of her mouth, and the chains on her wrists were real enough to bruise. Yet none of it softened her. She stood in the ransacked archive room, amid fallen ledgers and broken wax seals, like a trapped viper, still convinced the room belonged to her. Ronan entered first. He did not lower his sword. Seraphine's smile flickered anyway. "There's the devotion. The moon finally handed my sister something after all." Elara took in the room quickly. 2 dead guards near the eastern exit, 1 burned ledger, open cabinets. Someone had searched hard and fast for something specific. "What did they take?" Ronan asked. Seraphine's gaze slid to him. "You do know how to greet a girl. What did they take?" Her smile sharpened. "The truth, I assume. Men like your uncle never leave without it." Elara walked closer. Seraphine's eyes came to her and tightened. All that old rivalry, polished and hidden and poisoned, came alive between them at once. "You look disappointed," Elara said. Seraphine laughed softly. "Disappointed? No. I'm fascinated. All those years of being the dutiful elder daughter. And in the end, what made you matter wasn't grace, wit, or beauty. It was ancient blood and a king's animal hunger." Ronan took 1 step forward. Elara lifted a hand without looking at him. "No, she says it to wound because it's the only skill she mastered." Seraphine's face changed. It was subtle, tiny, but Elara had spent a lifetime studying the architecture of her sister's cruelty. She saw the exact second the barb failed to land where intended. That gave her more satisfaction than it should have. "Elara," Seraphine said softly, switching tactics at once. "He would have married me if the bond had not snapped." Ronan went utterly still. The archive room became very quiet. Seraphine kept her gaze on Elara, because she knew precisely where the knife belonged. "He chose me in front of the kingdom. He wanted me before fate embarrassed him." The wound opened cleanly. Elara felt it, so did Ronan. The bond was merciless that way. Ronan's jaw tightened. "Enough." Seraphine smiled at him through split lip and contempt. "Ah, there it is. Guilt in a crown." Elara should have stepped back. Instead, she walked until she stood directly in front of her sister, close enough to see the desperation hiding beneath the beauty. "Yes," Elara said, "he chose you, and look how that ended." Seraphine's breath caught. Elara leaned in slightly. "You spent your whole life believing being wanted was the same as being worth something. You should have aimed higher." For the first time that day, Seraphine looked slapped. Ronan's gaze hit Elara like flame. The bond surged with a dangerous, immediate satisfaction from him that made her pulse kick. He liked it when she cut. He liked watching her sharpen. That was a problem she intended to resent later. Thorn entered behind them with 2 surviving guards. Majesty, the lower hall is secured. For now, Ronan nodded once. Keys. A guard handed him the chain key. He moved toward Seraphine. Elara caught the motion instantly, and hated that she did. Some ugly, wounded part of her had no right to care whether Ronan put his hands on her sister. Yet the old humiliation from the altar was still alive enough to sting. Ronan saw the flicker in her face. He stopped. Then, without a word, he handed the key to Elara. The gesture hit with the force of a confession. You, not her. You decide. Elara took the key. Seraphine noticed too. The bitterness in her eyes deepened until it almost looked like grief. How noble. You've made her dangerous. Elara unlocked the chains. The moment the cuffs fell away, Seraphine rubbed her wrists and said, "You're too late anyway." Ronan's expression turned lethal again. Explain. The Regent found the East ledgers before you reached the well. The names, the old oaths, the northern markers. Frostfang knows by now. She looked at Elara. Half the border packs will call you queen. The other half will call for your death before you divide inheritance. Why are you telling us this? Thorn asked. Seraphine's mouth curved bitterly. Because your regent chained me in a vault and left me for dead when he realized I was no longer the useful sister. Even I take offense at being discarded. The room absorbed that. Elara studied her sister and saw what was left when vanity had been stripped of certainty. Anger, pride, shame too stubborn to admit itself. A lifetime of competition that had finally produced a winner neither of them had asked for, and the loss of that contest had wounded Seraphine in the only place she truly lived. It would have been easier if Elara felt nothing. Instead, she felt too much. Old love, old resentment, the ache of blood made ugly by ambition. What else? Elara asked. Seraphine looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, more quietly, Mother sold her wedding jewels to buy silence from 2 northern trackers after grandmother died. Father never knew. The regent found out last winter. He used it to make her help alter the treaty. Her gaze slid toward Ronan. She believed if I stood at the altar instead, you would never scent what my sister was. She thought the hidden line would remain hidden and everyone would survive. Elara closed her eyes briefly. So her mother had tried, in one more cowardly, desperate way, to save her, and helped ruin her instead. Ronan's voice went cold. Where is the regent headed now? Seraphine's lips tightened. Frostfang. Of course. The Eastern keep controlling the old northern pass, the last intact well outside the palace, the Black Standard, the one place in the kingdom where old Lyran blood could become a banner before dawn. Thorn swore. If he reaches the border packs first, he'll declare the Moonline illegitimate unless she kneels to him, Ronan said. And if that fails, he'll claim I rejected the rightful bride publicly and forfeited sacred favor. Seraphine laughed hollowly. You did reject the rightful bride publicly. The sentence cut deep, because it was true. Ronan looked at Elara. Nothing in his face softened, but guilt was there again, hard and living. Under it, something darker had begun taking root over the course of the day, a sort of relentless focus that had less to do with sacred law and more to do with the man himself. It watched her too closely. It burned too hot every time she hurt. It was moving from bond to obsession by slow degrees and terrifying honesty. Elara felt it. She did not have to like it to know it. Thorn began issuing orders to his guards, horses, provisions, northern route scouts secure the tower, the practical sounds of a kingdom trying not to break. Seraphine watched the chaos, then looked at Elara with that same expression she had worn in the cathedral, only stripped of glamour now. You can still hate him, you know. Ronan's attention sharpened instantly. Elara answered without looking away from her sister. I do. Something unreadable moved over Seraphine's face. Good, she said softly. At least one of us learned. Before Elara could decide what that meant, a dull boom shuddered through the archive chamber. The eastern wall trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. Thorn reached for his sword. "Siege ram!" Ronan's head snapped toward the corridor. He left a second force behind. Another boom. Closer. The iron-bound archive doors began to bend inward. Ronan seized Alara's arm, not gently this time, but not cruelly either. Pure instinct, pure urgency. The heat of his grip blasted through the bond and straight into her spine. Move. They ran for the rear stair as the doors splintered. Seraphine hesitated for one fatal second, staring at the broken exit and the approaching enemy and the man who had chosen her once, but no longer even looked back. Then she ran too. The stair dropped through the eastern tower toward the horse yard. Stones shook under their feet. Men shouted below. Somewhere near the upper chapel, fire had caught. The palace was becoming a battlefield. On the final turn, Seraphine stopped. Not from fear, from recognition. Standing in the lower landing, sword drawn, black wolf crest on his shoulder, waited a northern pack Lord Alara vaguely remembered from court. He had once kissed Seraphine's hand for too long, and looked at her as if beauty made useful property. He smiled now through the smoke. "Lady Seraphine, the regent asked that I return whichever sister survived." Seraphine whispered, "Dorian." He lunged. Ronan shoved Alara behind him and met the strike. Steel rang. The stair became chaos. Thorn drove into the second attacker coming up from below. One guard fell. Another shouted. Smoke thickened. Alara grabbed Seraphine's wrist and dragged her higher as Ronan held the landing almost alone, too broad and too violent to be mistaken for anything but king. Dorian parried once, twice, then laughed breathlessly. "She isn't yours, Dareth. You threw her away in front of the moon." Ronan's next strike nearly took his head off. The truth of the sentence had done exactly what Dorian intended. It made the Alpha King murderous. He drove the Northern Lord backward down 2 steps, then 3. Dorian barely held. Ronan fought differently now than in the cathedral, less controlled, more personal, every movement sharpened by that same ugly public memory. Alara saw it and hated how much it affected her, how much the knowledge of his regret had begun sinking hooks into wounds she wanted to keep clean and simple. Dorian shifted his grip suddenly and threw not at Ronan but at Alara. A second knife. Too fast. Seraphine moved first. Alara barely saw her sister step in front of her before the blade buried itself in Seraphine's side. Time stopped. Seraphine gasped. Blood bloomed blue-black across her torn gown. Alara caught her as she folded. Ronan killed Dorian in the same breath. No duel, no speech. Just one brutal strike through the throat and a spray of blood across the stair wall. Then he was turning, coming back up the stairs, and Alara was on her knees with Seraphine in her arms while the smoke thickened around them, and her sister's blood soaked hot through silk and skin. Seraphine looked down in disbelief, then up at Alara with a strange, dazed fury. "Well," she whispered, "that's new." Alara pressed her hand to the wound. "Don't talk." Seraphine gave a wet laugh that turned into a cough. "You always sound most like Mother when you're terrified." The sentence hit too hard. Ronan dropped to one knee beside them. He had blood on his face, on his throat, on his hands. Most of it wasn't his. "We need the physician now," Thorn shouted for one down the stairs. Seraphine grabbed Alara's wrist weakly before anyone could move her. Her eyes, once always so polished and triumphant, were suddenly stripped bare. "I didn't know he'd have you killed," she whispered. "I thought he only wanted you used." Alara stared at her. The confession landed in the center of the day like a final shard of glass. Seraphine smiled, bitter and fading. "I know. That doesn't help." Then the tower below them groaned, and the eastern wall gave way. Chapter 7. The collapse split the stair. Stone cracked under their knees. Fire roared upward through the torn lower landing. Thorn hauled Alara back by the shoulders a second before the steps where she had been kneeling sheared off and crashed into the inferno below. Ronan caught Seraphine. He lifted her in both arms as the tower shook around them and smoke rolled thicker through the corridor. For one disorienting instant, Elara saw the image clearly. The same king who had once chosen her sister at the altar now carrying that sister through fire because Elara would bleed if he let her die. The bond told her he knew that too. That knowledge made everything between them more dangerous. They burst out onto the eastern horse yard under a sky gone red with sunset and smoke. The palace bells still rang. Soldiers fought by the broken gate. The false royal livery of the regent's men lay in bloody strips across the cobbles. Horses screamed in the stables. Thorn cleared a path. The physician ran forward. Seraphine was taken from Ronan's arms to a hastily thrown blanket near the fountain. The wound was bad but not instantly fatal. Elara could tell by the healer's face before he spoke. Painful, bloody, survivable if they did not move her far. Ronan stood over the scene breathing hard, his black ceremonial coat ash-streaked and ruined, his hair damp with sweat and smoke, his eyes bright with a sort of barely controlled violence that made everyone around him move faster. Elara stepped toward the blanket. A soldier tried to stop her, perhaps out of reflex, perhaps because royal chaos made men stupid. Ronan's head turned. The soldier leaped out of her path. No word, no order, just the king's look. Elara reached Seraphine's side as the physician packed the wound. Her sister hissed through her teeth, then laughed faintly because pain had finally stripped the vanity from her voice. "You should enjoy this," Seraphine murmured. "I saved you. It's the most unbearable thing I've ever done." Elara looked down at her. "Why?" Seraphine's lashes fluttered. "Because I hate him more than I hate losing." Then she closed her eyes against the pain. The answer stayed under Elara's skin after the physician ordered everyone back. Hate him. Not Ronan. The regent, the sister who had always competed, had finally found the one man in the kingdom worth turning venom toward more than Elara. That mattered. Ronan came to stand beside her. They watched the physician work in silence. The yard around them smelled of smoke, blood, horse sweat, and scorched stone. The fountain water had turned pink around the edges from all the hands washed too quickly in it. At last Ronan said, "She'll live." Elara nodded once. His gaze moved to her face. "That matters to you." "It wasn't a question. She's still my sister. She tried to take your life. She tried to take my place." Elara looked toward the blanket. "That's uglier in some ways, simpler in others." Ronan absorbed that. There was no judgment in his face, only that same relentless attention, as if every honest thing she said went somewhere permanent inside him now. Thorn approached with a map case and soot on his forehead. "Majesty, the remaining attackers are dealt with. Scouts confirm the regent took the northern road 2 hours before sunset. He's riding with Frostfang men." Ronan's expression turned to war. "How many?" "Not enough to hold a siege. Enough to take the pass." Elara looked up. "He wants the old well." Ronan glanced at her sharply. "You know that—" She touched the moonstone at her throat. "I can feel it." The truth settled heavily among them. Thorn frowned. "Then if he reaches Frostfang before we do, every pack lord with old grievances hears his version first." Ronan nodded once. Decision settled over him the same way it had in the cathedral and the well chamber. Cold, immediate, final. "We ride in an hour," the physician objected, that the king had not slept. Thorn objected that half their men were wounded. The chief priestess objected that moon law had not yet been spoken over the awakened bond. Ronan ignored all three with equal efficiency. Then he did something that stunned the yard silent. He turned to Elara in front of all of them and went down on one knee. Every soldier within sight stopped moving. The physician nearly dropped a needle. Thorn muttered something that might have been a prayer. Ronan's gaze never left Elara's face. "Before we ride north, you need protection. The court and the packs will understand." The old wound leaped instantly. Protection. Not apology, not devotion, not desire properly named. A public act because politics demanded it. He saw that in her expression. Of course he did. His voice lowered, rougher now. And before you use that look on me, understand that I am aware I have not earned half the right to kneel. The honesty stripped the heat out of her first anger. He reached slowly toward the wolf signet at his hand and twisted it free. The ring bore the royal crest and the private seal that allowed commands in his name. He placed it in his open palm and held it up to her. "Take this." The yard held its breath. Elara stared at the ring. Why? Because if anything happens before Frostfang, every guard in this kingdom will obey that seal. Because the court will hesitate before touching whoever wears it. Because the packs know what it means when I hand it over publicly. Her heart pounded once, hard enough to hurt. What does it mean? Ronan's eyes held hers with terrible steadiness. It means the woman I rejected in front of the kingdom now carries authority second only to mine, until I prove I deserve to stand beside hers. No one in the yard moved. The sentence entered her like sunlight through a wound, warm only because it touched what hurt. He had chosen the worst possible way to make amends, which was also, infuriatingly, the most honest. Elara took the ring. A murmur rippled through the surviving soldiers and priestesses. Ronan rose in one smooth motion, taller and more dangerous than before, if that was possible. But the yard had shifted. The act had cost him something visible, not power, pride. He had bent it publicly toward the woman he had once denied. The bond reacted with a deep, shaking pulse that left her momentarily light-headed. Ronan leaned close enough that only she heard the next words. "This does not repair the altar." "No," she said, the ring warm in her palm. "It doesn't." His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth and returned. "I know." The line of heat that moved through her had nothing to do with the fires in the eastern tower. They rode north under moonrise. The war party was smaller than any king should have traveled with, and sharper because of it. Thorn led the vanguard. 12 wolves rode with them. The chief priestess insisted on coming because the awakened moonline without witness made her nervous enough to brave mountains. Seraphine and Lady Vale remained behind under guard, alive and furious and therefore, in Elara's view, improving. The road to Frostfang cut through black pines and old snowfields where the moon turned everything silver blue and too beautiful for the danger waiting ahead. Ronan rode beside Elara more often than necessary, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, never far. No one missed it. The bond made the distance between them feel like an instrument being tuned. Every shift of his horse, every glance, every time his hand drifted too near the hilt of his sword when another rider closed on her left side. He was not subtle, he was simply controlled. Around midnight they stopped at a ruined watchpost to water the horses. Elara stepped away from the others and stood near the broken wall overlooking the ravine. Wind moved through the pines below. Snow glowed under the moon like bone. The quiet would have been beautiful in another life. Ronan found her there. He did not speak at first. He only stood beside her, not touching, close enough that the warmth of him pressed through the cold night and made the whole cliff edge feel smaller. At last he said, "You should sleep." She looked out over the ravine. "You should have thought of that before publicly ruining my life." A corner of his mouth shifted. "You make cruelty sound efficient." "I learned from excellent models." Silence stretched. It wasn't empty. Nothing between them was empty anymore. Then he said, "I would have kissed you by now if you were anyone else." The confession hit so hard she turned toward him. Moonlight cut sharp lines across his face. He looked exhausted, wounded, and more dangerous for both. She searched his expression for mockery and found none. "Anyone else?" she repeated. "Yes, you're very bad at comfort. I'm not trying to comfort you." The answer came rough, honest, far too male. Elara's pulse started climbing for reasons she deeply resented. "Then what are you trying to do?" His gaze dropped once to the signet ring she now wore on her finger, then returned to her face. Survive not touching what the moon and my own stupid blood have decided to want. There was nothing pretty in the sentence. That made it devastating. The bond surged, hot and low and dangerous. Elara felt it in the base of her spine, in the sudden dryness of her mouth, in the insane urge to close the remaining inches and see whether his mouth was as destructive as the rest of him. Instead, she said, because pain had made honesty addictive, "You wanted my sister first." The words landed between them like a knife. Ronan did not look away. "No," she stared. "You chose her. I chose a political bride. I wanted control." His voice lowered. "This is not control." The rawness of that answer stripped the air from her lungs. He stepped closer. Not enough to touch. Enough that she could feel the heat off his body through her cloak and riding leathers. "Elara," he said. "Elaris." His throat moved once. "Elaris," and then an arrow buried itself in the stone beside her head. Ronan moved so fast she barely saw him. He hauled her against his chest and threw both of them behind the broken wall as a second arrow hissed through the moonlight exactly where she had been standing. The cliff erupted with howls. They had been followed. Chapter 8. The ambush came out of the dark below the watchpost. Northern wolves in black leather climbed the ravine like they had been born in it, hooks biting stone, blades flashing under moonlight. Thorn shouted for formation. Horses reared, steel rang. In a breath, the ruined post became a slaughter pit. Ronan shoved Elara behind the broken wall with one arm while drawing his sword with the other. Her back struck stone. His chest hit hers for a fraction of a second. Heat, force, male breath, the bond detonating so hard she could barely tell danger from him. Then he was gone. He hit the first attacker at the breach and killed him in a spray of blood over snow. Thorn drove another off the ledge. Even the chief priestess, grey-faced and furious, drew a silver dagger and took the inner stair. One wolf broke through and came straight for Elara with a smile that promised something ugly. She did not freeze. She slammed Ronan's signet ring into his cheekbone, split skin, grabbed the fallen knife at her feet, and buried it in his thigh when he lunged again. He roared. The next sound belonged to Ronan. He hit the man hard enough to drive both of them through the half-collapsed doorway. The scream cut off fast. Elara stood breathing hard, knife in hand, while snow blew through the ruined wall and the mountain night filled with blood and iron. Then the moonstone flared. The pull came back, north, deeper, sharper. A path, a hidden cut in the ridge. "There!" she shouted. "Left side!" Ronan did not ask how she knew. Thorn brake left. They fought into the ice split, just ahead of the next wave. The passage narrowed so brutally only 2 wolves could come through at once. That saved them. Their smaller number became an advantage. The northern pack died in the choke point, one body at a time. By dawn, pursuit had fallen behind. Frostfang rose ahead of them from the pale sky, black stone carved into the mountain, crouched above the final moon well, like a beast guarding a throat. Elara felt it before she saw it. Silver under stone, the last well, the one the regent meant to bend. The war party halted on a pine ridge overlooking the keep. Thorn spread maps, scouts moved. The chief priestess whispered prayers into the frost. Ronan came to stand beside Elara without seeming to choose it. "He's there," she said. "Yes. He'll use the well to call the border packs. He'll try. And if he succeeds..." Ronan looked at the fortress below, all shadow and old threat. Then half the kingdom kneels to a lie, and the other half burns correcting it. He turned to her. Dawn made him look harder, rougher, more dangerous. A king held upright by rage, duty, and something that had stopped pretending not to be personal. "Elara," he said. "Elaris," he nodded once. "If the well answers you there the way it answered below the cathedral, everything changes. Everything already changed. Worse. The bond tightened low and hot. "Then don't ask me to hide while you fight for me," she said. Something in his face shifted. "I was about to ask the opposite." She blinked. "When we go in, you stay with me." The words were possessive, protective, and threaded now with a respect he had earned the hard way. She looked at the signet ring on her hand, then back at him. "You finally learned." A dark flicker crossed his mouth. "I'm trying." She should have left it there. Instead she asked, "And if I refuse?" His gaze dropped to her mouth for one dangerous second. "Then I carry you out of Frostfang over my shoulder and let the packs gossip themselves sick." Heat moved through her at exactly the wrong moment. A scout dropped from the ridge and hit one knee. "Majesty, the regent has hostages at the well." Ronan went still. "Who?" "Your mother's former handmaid, 2 northern priestesses, and Lady Vale. He had her taken from the palace before dawn." Alara went cold. The scout swallowed. "And he hung House Liran's banner above the basin." Below them, Frostfang waited with black walls, silver light, and war stripped of disguise. Ronan looked at Alara. The bond pulled tight enough to hurt. "We end this now," he said. Chapter 9. They entered Frostfang through an old ice sluice beneath the western wall. The passage was narrow, wet, and old enough to remember her blood. Crescent marks still clung to the stone beneath moss and frost. Alara touched one, and felt the same deep recognition she had felt at the cathedral well. House Liran had lived here, ruled here, bled here. Then the basin opened. The final moon well lay in the center of a circular court cut into the mountain, open to the pale sky through a shattered ring of stone. Silver water churned below. Frost clung to the standing pillars. Above them hung the old Liran banner, restored and raised like a threat. At the far end stood the regent. Lady Vale knelt bound at his feet. 2 northern priestesses were chained near the altar. The ledgers lay open beside a silver ritual blade. He had prepared for theatre. "There," he said with a smile. "I knew blood would bring you home." Ronan stepped into the basin first, all lethal certainty and black steel. Thorns spread left with the wolves. The chief priestess held the rear. Alara came in beside Ronan, and the well answered at once. Silver rippled upward under the surface. The regent noticed. Interesting. Lady Vale saw her daughter and broke. Elaris. The true name rang through the basin. The watching border wolves shifted. There would be no hiding now. The regent laid a hand over the ledgers. "I have blood records, oaths, names, and the last intact well. You have a king who rejected the rightful bride before the whole kingdom." He looked up at the northern wolves. "Tell me which story the packs will follow." No one answered. Ronan's voice crossed the basin like iron. "The one where I kill you before breakfast." The regent laughed, then turned to Alara. "Come here, and I let your mother live long enough to confess in comfort." Lady Vale made a broken sound. Alara felt the well pull harder. She did not move. The regent's gaze sharpened. "You think he can protect you from what you are?" Ronan answered without looking away from him. "I think you've had enough time breathing." Then the regent made his mistake. He put the ritual blade to Lady Vale's throat. The basin changed. Alara felt every old humiliation, every lie, every wound from the altar, and the hidden years narrow into one clean frozen point. Beside her, Ronan felt it too. She knew because he turned his head slightly and looked at her with that fierce recognition she had started seeing whenever she became sharper than expected. This time he did not tell her to stay back. He said, low enough for only her, "Tell me what you need." The respect in that nearly undid her. "The well," she said. "I need the well." Ronan nodded once. The basin erupted. Thorn's wolves hit the flank. Northern guards dropped from the arches. Steel clashed. Priestesses screamed. The regent jerked Lady Vale toward the altar. Ronan went straight for him. The clash between uncle and nephew was immediate and vicious. The regent fought elegantly. Ronan fought like elegance had personally offended him. Alara ran for the well. 2 wolves broke toward her. The first reached for her shoulder. She pivoted and smashed a silver ritual bowl into his jaw. Bone cracked. The second went low with a short blade. She slipped on Frost and would have gone down if one of the chained priestesses had not whipped her chain around his wrist. "Go!" the woman gasped. Elara ran. Her hands met the well lip like cold light. The moonstone blazed. Silver fire raced under her skin. This was stronger than the cathedral, older, deeper, not awakening but return. Behind her, steel screamed. The regent had cut Ronan across the ribs. Elara felt the wound through the bond like a knife under her own flesh. She turned and saw blood darkening Ronan's side, saw the regent smile. And then Lady Vale moved. Her mother threw herself between them and caught the regent's sword arm with both hands. The strike meant for Ronan went wide. The regent swore and flung her to the stone. Ronan did not waste the opening. He drove forward hard enough to crash them both into the altar. Elara turned back to the well. There was no time left. She cut her palm on the bowl's rim and let the blood fall. The world stopped. Silver water rose in a column. The standing stones ignited. Every wolf in the basin froze as the light swallowed the core. Elara stood in it, breathing hard, blood running down her hand, moonstone blazing, while something vast and ancient moved inside the water like remembered law. Then words came through her. "This blood is not yours to bargain." The basin trembled. Every gaze came to her. The regent went white. Ronan, sword in hand and blood on his mouth, stared at her as if he had just seen what she could become. The silver water lashed out. It ripped the ledgers from the altar. It knocked the ritual blade free. It tore the old banner from the arch. The Lyran crescent fell. Elara lifted her bleeding hand. The lie ends here. The well obeyed. Water struck the altar like judgment. The regent flew backward, slammed across the stone, and lay gasping in silver spray. The border wolves recoiled. Some dropped to one knee. The priestesses began to chant. The moon crown had answered. The regent tried to rise. Ronan crossed the basin through blood and silver light, and stopped over him. He looked down at the man who had poisoned mothers, purged bloodlines, swapped brides, and tried to build a kingdom out of women's throats. The regent spat blood and still smiled. "If you kill me with her standing there, every pack will say she made you weak." Ronan never blinked. "They can say it from their knees." He drove the sword through the regent's heart. Silence followed. The silence of a kingdom finally allowed to breathe. The silver light softened. Ronan turned. His eyes found Elara immediately. Blood ran down his ribs. He looked half feral, wholly royal, and far too devastating standing in the wreckage of old law. The bond between them shook with shared survival, shared violence, and the final death of denial. He came to her. At the well lip, he stopped close enough that she could feel the heat off him through the silver mist. "Elara," he said. She looked at him. "Elaris," he corrected at once, voice rough with blood loss and truth. "I need to say this before the court poisons it with language." Her pulse hit hard. "I rejected you because I was arrogant enough to believe I understood what belonged beside me." He took a breath. "Then the moon chose. Then your blood answered. Then you stood in war, betrayal, fire, and every room built to break you. And every time the kingdom tried to place you beneath me, you rose where I had to look straight at you." The bond burned. "You are my mate," he said. "But worse for me, and truer, you are the first person in this kingdom I would trust with my throat." That confession wrecked the air. Then Ronan, bloodied, proud, still dangerous enough to frighten gods, went down on one knee in silver water. "If the moon crown rises, it rises beside me, not beneath. If you refuse me, I still defend your throne. If you accept me, I spend the rest of my life repairing the altar I destroyed." Elara stared at him. The wounds of the day still lived under her skin. The altar, the humiliation, the sight of his hand reaching for her sister. None of that vanished because he knelt beautifully and said ruinous things in the right light. But other truths lived there now too. The signet ring he had given her, the way he had asked what she needed, the way he had stepped back from command and made space for choice. The old law had not only trapped a king with his mate, it had cornered him into becoming worthy of her. Elara lifted her signet hand and touched his face. The contact hit them both like heat made holy. Ronan closed his eyes for one brief, unguarded second. "Stand up," she said. He did. She looked at the blood, the fury, the restraint, and the obsession he was no longer hiding especially well. "Next time," she said, "choose the right bride before the moon has to embarrass you." The corner of his mouth moved. Then he kissed her. The basin vanished under the force of it. Silver mist, chanting priestesses, wolves, ruined altar, dead regent, everything fell away. Ronan kissed like a man with too much control and no patience left for it. Heat, hunger dragged through restraint, reverence made dangerous by need. Elara rose into it before she could stop herself. His hand came to her waist, strong and shaking once before he mastered it. The bond surged white-hot, no longer savage but complete. When he pulled back, both of them were breathing harder. The priestesses had begun chanting again. The chief priestess approached carrying a silver circlet drawn from the altar niche. Tears shone in her eyes. "My queen," she said. Ronan looked at Elara. "No command, no demand, only the same steady offering. Choice, yours." Elara took the circlet, and above Frostfang, under the open sky and the eyes of wolves who would carry the story to every corner of the kingdom before dawn, the moon crown rose again. Epilogue. The second wedding took place where the first one should have ended, with the kingdom watching and no one daring to lie. They stood in the restored moon court 6 weeks later, under spring light and white blossoms, above channels where silver water from both awakened wells now ran together beneath stone. The border packs had bent. The ledgers had been read aloud. Lord Vale died in confinement. Lady Vale lived under priestess watch, telling truths too late. Seraphine healed, scarred and bitter in cleaner ways, then left court by choice with no crown and, for the first time in her life, no audience. Elara wore moon silver instead of white. No veil, no ribbon to tear. The old circlet rested in her dark hair. The moonstone lay warm at her throat, no longer hidden. Ronan stood opposite her in black and silver, scarred, battle-marked, and still dangerous enough to make peace look temporary. The kingdom saw it all. The king who had once rejected a bride now looking at that same woman as if every room shrank when she entered it. And the Moon Queen who had been hidden in another family's name now standing openly in her own. When the priestess asked who challenged the joining of the crowns, no one answered. Ronan took Elara's hand and spoke first, before witness, war law and moon law. "I bind myself without command over her spirit, without claim over her crown, and without lie between my mouth and hers. What I broke, I will spend my life repairing." Then he added, eyes fixed on hers, "I choose Elaris Liren, called Elara Val, not because the moon corrected me, but because once I saw her clearly, every other choice became insult." The court felt that line. So did she. When her turn came, Elara gave them no softness they had not earned. "I accept no crown that asks me to kneel smaller than I am. I accept no bond that silences what was done to me. I accept no king who mistakes desire for right." She looked at Ronan and saw the dangerous, almost smile at the edge of his mouth. "But I choose the man who learned too late, and then learned properly. I choose the king who bent pride before pride destroyed him. I choose the wolf who now knows I stand beside him or nowhere near him at all." The court laughed softly, breathless and delighted. The priestess bound their hands with silver. The wells answered. Water flashed through the channels. Bells rang overhead. White petals fell across the court like blessing rewritten from wreckage. Ronan kissed her before the final prayer finished. This time the court cheered. Later, under moonlight on the private terrace, he stood crownless at the balustrade until she came to him. The city still celebrated below. Roses scented the night. At last he touched the moonstone at her throat, then the place where an older wound had once lived. "You know what the bards are singing already," he said. Alara lifted a brow. "Something embarrassing, I hope." A dark glint entered his eyes. "They're calling it the story of the mate bond that snapped to the wrong bride." She smiled. "And?" He stepped closer, hand sliding to the back of her neck. The bond purred low between them. "And they're wrong." She looked up at him. His gaze dropped to her mouth, then returned with all that same terrible certainty he had once wasted, and then rebuilt the hard way. "The bond," the Alpha King said, "snapped to the only queen who was ever meant to survive me." Then he kissed her again beneath the moon, and this time there was no altar left to ruin, only a kingdom below them, learning how to bow to both.